sleek and clean, the death machines stand ready on the decks. Inside, the men who fight in them run through their final checks. Absorbed in it, the pilots sit, their lives unmoved by hate. For those that fly make others die and never touch their fate. He just flies the bomber, he never sees their eyes when the hell comes down. He just flies the bomber.
Hello and welcome to Lost Transmissions, a Horus Heresy podcast based on Battlefleet Gothic. My name is Jesse, and I'm here with our hosts Stephen and Austin. How you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
Not bad, not bad.
Excellent. So, what are we talking about today first, guys?
We are going over Ordnance today.
Cool.
But I understand that we have a couple of user-submitted or viewer-submitted questions.
Or listener-submitted.
Listener-submitted. It isn't listening, just
we don't
watching
get
with
a lot
your
of
ears.
viewers.
Yeah. So, yeah, we got a lot of positive feedback from the pilot yesterday, and had two questions from Mr. Baldwick on Discord. He says he has a few questions for the BFG episode we got just released. Number one, in regards to the Mechanicum and their hoarding tendencies, did they keep the best toys for themselves? And how do they compare both in lore and on the tabletop to the rest of the Legion forces?
Well, the short answer is that there's not a lot to go on from the lore standpoint as to what the Mechanicum does and does not keep for themselves. Presumably they do keep a lot of cool stuff for themselves because, you know, they're hoarders. But there's not a lot of hard evidence in books or rule books or novels or anything to say what exactly the Basilican Astra was doing during the Horus Heresy and during the Great Crusade. On the tabletop, though, we can definitively say that, yes, the Mechanicum has kept all of the best toys for themselves, despite the fact that they use identical fleet lists with the Legions and the Armada Imperialis. You know, they still have the same types of cruisers and battleships to draw from. Mechanicum ships have access to several upgrade tables, which makes them a little more efficient and gives them more of a combat punch. They are comparable to Custodians in that Mechanicum ships are more expensive individually than their Legion counterparts. They're stronger for that, but the loss of them is more significant because they give up more victory points to the opponent.
Sure.
Yeah, like Steven said, there just isn't a lot of lore on the ships themselves. Like, there's a whole book called Mechanicum. It deals with Mechanicum fleet, not at all. You know, there's couple
one
of
spaceship in the entire book.
Yeah, Jesus. I mean, from a 40k perspective, it does look like they intentionally design all of their ships to be ever so slightly better than regular Imperial ones. But is that because they were doing that in the Horus Heresy as well, or is it just because they remember ship, and so have ships of the same quality that everybody in the Horus Heresy would have had? It's just been 10,000 years, and, you know, fuck you, regular humans. Can't definitively say. They do have a couple of strange ships that get a mention. Like, there's a Warbark, but you don't really get a sense of whether or not that's a Mechanicum-only ship. You know, it's a bark. It's for some weird purpose, and it does the thing, and it happens to be Mechanicus. And are the Mechanicus the only ones that have barks? No. Are they the only ones that have a specific type of bark? Don't really know. On the tabletop, however, like Steven said, they are distinctly better. Not by a huge amount. Like, the Custode Space Marine analogy is pretty good, except that one Custode, think of it like Custode versus Marine, just basic guys shooting at each other, rather than the hand-to-hand where a Custode will annihilate a whole squad of Marines on his own and not really care. A Mechanicus ship is going to be better than the equivalent Imperial Navy or Legion ship, but only just. So, like, in a one-on-one fight, Mechanicum ship probably going to win. In a 3-on-3 fight, the individual benefits start to matter a little less, and then suddenly it becomes like 4-on-3 because of the points difference. and things kind of go in that way. On the tabletop, though, they do have a couple of really neat advantages because they can get, hey, swap things out for lances. The light cruisers can have a better prow. You can increase the range of your weapons batteries and do kind of all the little things in a normal fleet. Hey, yeah, my flagship might have a refit and it'll be really cool. It's got extra 15 centimeter range on its weapons batteries. That's pretty sweet. A Mechanicum fleet calls that a Tuesday, and all of them have it.
Yep.
So I guess the best way to answer that is they don't 100% keep like specific things for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But if they have the best things, yeah, they're going to pass them out to the legions, but they are definitely holding on to a good number.
Gotcha. And
I think there was another question.
Yep, the second question. You guys mentioned the development of tactics in the Imperium to fight ships of similar sizes and how it was unexpected they would ever have to fight each other. But in the Lion's Primarch book, spoiler alert, it mentions certain weapons stored away as they would be the ones that the Dark Angels / the Emperor would use to crush the Mechanicum in the case they got uppity. Do you know of any examples of the Mechanicum having things developed or stored specifically to fight against the Imperium?
Again, it's
The command machine?
yeah. Well, the command machine wasn't. The command machine's a bit of an outlier, I think.
Yeah, that wasn't a serious answer.
It's definitely another instance of who knows what the hell the Mechanicum was doing, because nobody has been allowed to read the records. But the more practical answer is probably, in short, no. Because while the Emperor and the legions definitely had their things for specifically fighting the Mechanicum already have all of the strongest weapons. They're the ones that made them.
Sure.
So they don't necessarily need anything per se. You could make a gun that could kill a squad of Marines in the blink of an eye, or you could just have an Ordnance engine.
Right. That being said,
Yeah.
So it's
with
probably
the weapons of night and stuff that the Emperor kind of hid away from the Mechanicum,
yeah.
and they had some sort of inkling to have something in their back pocket, so to speak.
Maybe,
I don't know.
but,
I
but
gotta agree with Steven. We just don't really know. And like he said, they've got all the good stuff. I think what would more likely happen is because the Emperor, like all the guys that are talking about, like, oh, should we rebel against the Emperor or not? The Emperor's not really the Omnissiah. They're not wrong to say the Imperium and the Emperor specifically kind of have their boots on the neck of the Mechanicum.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not as much like wiggle room to hide great and wonderful crazy things. Now, once they start actively plotting against the Emperor and are going to side with Horus, and suddenly they're putting demons in the scrap code, obviously, then yeah, they're like opening all the boxes the Emperor told them not to touch and being like, oh, this will fuck up a Space Marine. But I don't think they had anything like the Dark Angels pile of crazy, for the 200 years of the Great Crusade that they were just sitting on going like, man, these Terrans fuck us, we're going to wreck them. But,
Gotcha.
as Steven said, we haven't really read much of anything as far as the memos go, so we could be very much wrong on that.
But we can also, tell you what, Mr. Baldrick, we will also send these questions to the Heresy Grad School guys. So
Yeah, never let Jason miss a chance to dive deeper into Mechanicum lore.
right. I bet he would love to take a look at that.
Yeah, he's really going to hate doing the research for this one.
So yeah.
Darn, sorry, Jason.
Yeah, with so little time on his hands, with the pandemic and everything.
So this is the official episode 1. We are out of the pilot.
Yep.
So
We have made the break into real space.
That's right. Let's first and foremost let's talk about your project, guys. Battlefleet Heresy.
Honestly, the whole thing started as Austin's idea, truth be told. One day I asked Austin, after he had shown me a couple of games of Battlefleet Gothic, hey, is there any is there any accommodations made for playing in the Heresy, like if these two fleets were combined? And he said, no, I don't have anything, but I have found like a Word document that he sent to me, and spoiler alert, Austin was lying. He was the one that wrote it.
Yeah, so I do admit when it comes to this, especially before, like, because this was years ago. Like, I feel like I
3 or
knew
4,
Stephen
yeah.
well, but not like, yeah, it was like 4 years ago. But I've found that the best way to introduce anything to a gaming group, until you're really known for like being able to write good rules and good missions for a specific thing, regardless of how good you actually are, right? Friggin', Rick Priestley could come into your gaming group and be like, "Hey guys, I wrote these great new rules." And you'd be like, "Really, Rick Priestley? Are you that good at it?" Like, it doesn't seem to matter.
Why does it say Rick Priestley wins whenever he plays the game?
He's just good, man. But
it's in the rule book.
everybody seems much more like,
Amenable.
or much less likely to like give it a go if it's like, "Oh yeah, my buddy wrote these." Now, if you say, "Hey, I found these on the internet," for whatever fucking reason, that just like is a green light for nerds to be like, "Oh, you found that on the internet?
Let's
My
try
God."
it out.
Meanwhile, who the fuck knows who's writing? And I mean, we do it all the time, right? We find cool stuff on the internet. Be like, "Oh man, look at this guy's model. Like, he wrote these rules for it. That's really cool. Yeah, all right."
Mournable guys.
Meanwhile, that guy's friends have seen that model and those rules and are like, "I don't know, man. You doing it?" So yeah, I had written way back when I was still living in LA, when the Heresy kind of first was getting going, and we were playing a lot of BFG out there, all just like normal BFG. We had a big group, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest in the Horus Heresy from those guys because they're all doing their own things. But
Sure.
I was bored at work for a little bit, and I was like, man, fucking Horus Heresy, that's where it's at, man. Good shit. So I started writing rules
Dump
for like,
stock in Horus Heresy.
right? Like, well, this would be great because then you could use like those Chaos ships, and there'll probably be a few Imperial ships. I'm going to start looking into like what ships are where, and then you can have special rules for the legions, and that would be really cool. And then, like I said, I lied to Steven to get him to try them out. And
Yep,
yeah, it
and
just sort of exploded. And I will say,
The
I
unknown
did.
guinea pig.
Yeah, well, kind of, yeah. So I laid kind of that foundation, and I don't know if I was just bored or doing other things. I don't know what. But I kind of looked around one day and was like, holy shit, Steven has done like, what the fuck is half of this? And it was awesome.
What Austin didn't realize is that if given, I am a hobby rodent, and if you give me soft, pliable material to nest into, I'll just dig and build and write, and then next thing you know, I'm just like nestled in the corner of the enclosure.
Yeah, so
amongst all my homebrew.
It went from being like this thing that I wrote kind of for myself to suddenly like there were a couple other guys interested in it in the local group, and Steven's writing all of this stuff, and like it's all great and crazy, and I'm just sort of there being like, been playing Battlefleet Gothic since like 2000, 2001. That, I understand what you're trying to do there, but that's not gonna do that. So more just like
constantly evolving rule set you guys are working on too, right? More or less.
Yeah. In part because I come up with so many ideas, and I just give Austin a giant steaming wet pile of ideas, and he molds it into something usable.
Yeah, I've never regretted giving someone the link to the Smotherman formula as much as I did Steven. For those listeners that don't know, that's sort of a famous, somebody did the math on breaking down what like a hull point and like a shield is worth in Battlefleet Gothic to let you design your own ships from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mostly accurate. Like, it was in actual GW publications.
Mm-hmm. Which basically makes it canon.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But we kind of went away from that path when we realized that other people, like, it wasn't just like me and Steven and then a couple of you, the local guys, like, humoring us. So we were like, we should be a little more professional about it. So we started doing, more research into, like, okay, well, we know this ship isn't heresy legal, but it's a lot like this other ship that we've read in the fluff, so we're going to use that. Like the Thunderbolt escort. Mm-hmm. So the heavy escort that's, like, very specifically designed long after the Horus Heresy, but then we were reading the fluff, this apostate heavy escort, that's really cool, it's Heresy era, Thunderbolt rules, boom, done. And we know that it's, at least more balanced, hopefully, than something that Steven and I just sort of did together. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So all the ships and everything focused on the Horus Heresy era, the Age of Darkness, more or less.
Yes.
If people have ships that don't fit into that category, they can still play with them, though, right?
So two things about that. One, so Battlefleet Heresy, the, like, Armada Imperialis Legion lists, run the Imperial ships from BFG, the Chaos ships, Space Marine ships. All the Space Marine ships, most of the Chaos, though weirdly not all, and a little more than half of the Imperial ships, including most of the, like, ones you'd find in the core rulebook and stuff like that.
So no Xenos, though.
No Xenos.
Just like Horus Heresy.
Yeah, like, and honestly, though, if you were playing a Great Crusade campaign or whatever, and somebody had, like, Orcs or Eldar, those guys haven't changed in 10,000 years. It's fine.
Yep, just go for it.
Yeah, so, like, we don't need to write any rules for Heresy-era Orcs. Just play friggin' Orcs. But we were careful when we were picking, especially what I mentioned earlier about having ships with Heresy names, combining them with kind of the 40k ship stats, to make sure that any layout of standard Imperial cruiser or Chaos cruiser is represented in this list.
Okay.
So you should be able, any model that you have, Imperial Chaos Space Marine, should be usable, even if not all of the specific, like, types of ship are usable.
Gotcha.
And if you really like, a Nemesis class fleet carrier or that Long Serpent cruiser, we do have an experimental ships list, which can let you kind of build your own.
Yeah, it's actually it's just the Smotherman formula with some extra rules. If you want to use a ship that maybe you played Battlefleet Gothic once long ago in the before time, and you just really, really, really love your despoiler battleship, but it's not in Heresy, you can use the experimental ship rules, the Smotherman formula, to build identical to the hull point and to the weapons battery the despoiler class ship and put it in your fleet. There's going to be extra rules that go on that, but you can still do it.
Yeah,
it just won't be a despoiler per se.
And Battlefleet Gothic, like, one of the things that I love about it, and I think most people that play it love about it, is that the missions and the campaigns can be so asymmetrical that even if your ship isn't like, all right, yeah, I really love the Jovian battlecruiser back in the day, and I rebuilt one with the Smotherman formula, but it's more expensive than it was then. Balls. It doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot. Like 30 points either way in a fleet engagement is a rounding error. Like, it's fine. Nobody cares.
Sure. Cool.
So yeah, we want it to be themed very closely to the Heresy, ship-wise, rules-wise, but we also wanted to make it accessible for, all those people that have ships flying around since 2003, 2012, whenever, don't play Battlefleet Gothic because there's nobody that plays Battlefleet Gothic in their area, but wants to, like, oh yeah, I'll have some ships to run around with my sexy new Dark Angels rules. I'll go beat up on some Emperor's children. That'll be fun. Hint, hint.
Nice. Cool. So, to start off with, if you guys are interested in checking out the rules as we go through this, go to rr30k.com, and you go ahead and click on that Battlefleet Heresy tab, and it'll take you to a list of all of our current rules.
Mm-hmm.
And you can
I should point out,
check them out. Yep.
The basic rules we use are the Battlefleet Gothic rules, 2010 FAQ. So, like, you don't need, like, those rules are on the internet. They're not hard to find. I don't think we actually have a link to them on the site.
We can definitely put one in there.
Yeah, if we find one, we can put one in there. But what's on the website is taking those kind of core rules and playing BFH with them instead of BFG.
Indeed.
So, on to the main course of tonight.
Ordnance, that thing that everybody loves until they don't.
Yeah, it's
Take it
great
away.
until the other guy has too many.
Yep.
Too many
Ordnance.
being any more than you.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a lot of torpedoes. Ordnance in Battlefleet Gothic falls into two categories, essentially. They fall into dummy ordnance, unguided ordnance, torpedoes, orbital mines, specialist torpedoes, and attack craft, which are fighters, bombers, and assault boats. And now normally, just about any ship in the Imperial line, in fact, every ship in the Imperial line, which is to say the Imperial Navy, carries torpedoes. And the Emperor and the Dictator carry attack craft. Torpedoes are kind of few and far between in the Chaos line, but they make up for it with a greater number of carriers. They have the Despoiler, which, again, not legal in Heresy, the Venerable Styx heavy cruiser, and the Devastation cruiser, all of which are carriers.
Yeah, and that Styx is really... We're going to have to do an episode on carriers.
Yep.
Because she's sexy.
If I could, I would do an entire episode on just the Styx.
Yeah.
But alas.
So where do you want to start? You want to start with the attack craft or the torpedoes and mines?
Let's talk about torpedoes. Big, huge, 100-meter long nuclear ICBMs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do not fuck around. There seems to be kind of, at least in the books reading it, two kind of subtypes. One, kind of your traditional wet Navy torpedo sort of thing. It's big. It's, standard 40K upscale. Runs into a ship, explodes. That's great. It's like a plasma warhead is what they describe on the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another version which gets into kind of that optimal close-in range and then launches about 40 tiny missiles that actually have the payload under the presumption that, you might be able to hit this 100-meter or 100-foot-long thing with that quad las cannon you're using as your, light anti-ordnance gun, but you're not hitting 40 missiles the size of a Volkswagen bus, so good luck.
Yep.
In game terms, they are phenomenal. The big advantage of both torpedoes and bombers is that they ignore shields.
Mm-hmm.
Shields in Battlefleet Gothic are real annoying. Most cruisers have two. Light cruisers, escorts will have one. Battleships can have 3 or 4. And every point of damage you cause drops a shield. Which doesn't sound too terribly bad, except they regenerate every turn if you're not in contact with blast markers. So
Or
you'll
if
say,
your shield generators haven't been destroyed.
Yeah. So here is my Gothic class cruiser. It has 4 lances that hit on 4s. I fire at the enemy ship. I get 2 hits, because that's the average. The shields are down. Huzzah! Before that Gothic can fire again, the shields are back up, and you're host. Not so with torpedoes and attack craft. They just fly right on through.
Yep, presumably they go slow enough or are made of something that void shields just don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the fluff reason is that they are too slow
Yeah,
for the
despite the
shields
fact that
to.
they are crossing interplanetary gulfs
Yeah,
in
Earth to the
an
moon
hour.
in a turn.
Yep. So,
So yeah, your torpedoes are generally built. They're going to outrun everything because in game, all ordnance moves twice a turn. So Battlefleet Gothic, I go, you go. I move all of my ships in the ordnance phase. Both players move all their ordnance, starting with the person whose turn it is. So my turn, I move my ships, I shoot my guns, I move my ordnance. The enemy moves his ordnance, and then the next turn it all happens again. So even though bombers technically only go 20 centimeters a turn, and that's only just as fast as a standard Imperial cruiser, over the course of a game turn, it'll go 40 centimeters to the enemy's 20. You're hosed.
mhm.
Torpedoes, as a rule of thumb, go 30 centimeters, so they're going 60 a turn, which gives them a basic range if you're firing them from an Imperial cruiser of 80 centimeters, right? Because you move your ship 20, you blow your load, you go about your day. They are a little inefficient. The reason for that, and this goes for all attack craft as well, is the reload ordnance special order. You're only allowed to go on one order a turn, uh, and once you fire your torpedoes, you have to have your 10,000 deck slaves use their chains and hold the next one into place, and that takes an order from the captain apparently. So once you get into kind of knife fighting range, you're not going to be reloading and firing your torpedoes again. You're going to be bracing for impact or trying to turn faster or locking on to fire your guns more efficiently. Normally, I'll fire torpedoes 2, 3 times from a ship in a game, and that's maybe 10 or 15 turns. So 20% of the time I'm firing torpedoes, 30% of the time.
Yeah, there seems to be 2 times to fire the torpedo, and that's at long range to use as area denial, or at point blank shotgun style.
Yeah.
It's too close to avoid them. There's so many of them, it's gonna hurt.
Yeah. So we do use, like I said, the FAQ rules for this. In original Battlefleet Gothic, each torpedo with its own tiny marker, and you could combine it into a wave that could wind up being like 8 inches across if you had enough torpedoes to fire, and a ship would run through them, hit the 4 or 5 that would cross the ship's base, and that would be the end of it. Nowadays, it's a marker not quite 20 millimeters across, and that's 3 torpedoes. That's 30 torpedoes that day. Like Stephen said, if you fire them early,
Yeah.
they're really easy to dodge. Right? They just go in a straight line after you launch them. There's no pre-measuring in BFG, but it's a straight line. Everybody knows how fast they go. There are no tricks to make them go
Yep.
faster, so you can just go like, okay, do I want to run into these 6 torpedoes, or would I rather like turn out of my line of travel and just avoid them altogether? Nobody has to worry.
And there's something undeniably psychological in torpedoes, because if you play Battlefleet Gothic long enough, and you start to get a feel of what kind of damage certain classes of ships can do with their broadsides, and you start to memorize the gunnery table and the statistics of actually damaging your opponent. So when somebody comes up to you with a murder class and says, all right, 10 weapons batteries into you, and you watch them calculate it out, and it ends up being 4 shots, and you're like, okay, well, 4 shots, armor 5, probably only going to drop 1 shield. I'm not going to brace. I'll take it. I'll do whatever. Same thing with a Gothic or a Lunar. For some reason, torpedoes are way scarier, because it's always the same number of torpedoes that are going to hit you, and you don't know how many of them are actually going to damage you. But if they do, you don't get your shield. It's just going to be straight up damage.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Let me stop us for a moment and explain how this works in game to people that don't know. When you fire ordnance, so torpedoes or attack craft, and it hits an enemy ship, they have turrets. Every ship has a certain number of turrets, which are your quad las cannon arrays, your friggin'
Autocannon batteries.
Earthshaker guns that are firing like flak 88s, all designed to shoot down fighters and torpedoes and all of that. Cruisers have 2 as a rule of thumb. Escorts will have 1 usually, and a carrier will have 1 more than whatever its class is. So like the Dictator cruisers, the Imperial carrier, it has 3 turrets. On a 4-up, they destroy a torpedo or a fighter, either one, and that's all she wrote. 2 caveats to that, though. 1, you have to decide if you're going to brace or not before you shoot your turrets, and bracing halves the number of turrets that you fire. And 2, you can only shoot at either torpedoes or attack craft. So if I have, say, 4 bombers attacking my ship, and then I have 3 waves of torpedoes, and I fire at those bombers, I can't shoot at those torpedoes at all with turrets. Or I could fire at each individual wave of torpedoes and let the bombers go through. So you got to kind of work that math in your head. And like Steven said, I think the reason it's such a big psychological thing, even though they're still rolling against armor, so they still normally use 5 to do damage. It's, all right, 6 torpedoes have hit. I have 2 turrets that hit on a 4-up, so it's going to be 5 torpedoes rolling against me. Does damage on a 5 or better. That's only 1 or 2 points of damage. But if you miscalculate, unlike weapons batteries, where, he's only going to do 1 hit, and he rolls 3 out of 4 hits instead, that's only 1 point of damage to your ship. If you do that math wrong with torpedoes, suddenly you've taken 3 points of damage, have a critical hit, and your shields have collapsed, or your weapons batteries are offline, or whatever. Yeah. So the potential...
Many a time I have thought to myself, it's only 6 torpedoes. I can deal with that. All 6 hit, and just, now my ship has 2 hull points left and is crippled.
Yep. And a crippled ship is pretty horrific. All the weapons are halved. Suddenly it can't move as quick. Like, there's so many problems. You just don't want it to happen. That's when you start giving up victory points. Mm-hmm. So even though you're only firing torpedoes, 2-3 times a game, and that first volley is just to make the other guy blink and doesn't do any damage, they're still real good. Especially on smaller things. So like the Cobra. It's an Imperial Navy
destroyer.
Escort.
Little escort, yeah.
Little destroyer. Only 4-up armor, only 1 shield, but 2 torpedoes. And you can take them in packs of 6. Suddenly that's 12 torpedoes. And they go 30 centimeters and turn really fast. And they can just run in, fire off their torpedoes, make you hit them, and then run away again. And it's annoying and great, depending on who has them.
Depending on which side of it you're on. Torpedoes are mean. Specialist torpedoes.
As far as attack craft in general, is the enemy ships can run over them, and that triggers them as well.
Yes.
And torpedoes can hit your own ships. So sometimes, I've been guilty of this, and, it's late in the game, the lines have crossed, there are ships everywhere, I've got somebody dead to rights with torpedoes, I fire them, 1 is destroyed by turrets, 2 hit the enemy ship, and those remaining 3 just keep going.
Yep, it bears noting
and
that
suddenly
torpedoes
I realize,
will just keep going.
Oh no, I'm going to have to move my own ship through my own torpedoes, and they're dumb, so they just hit them.
Yep. Oops.
So there's a friendly fire potential, which is fun and terrifying in equal measure.
And there's most ships are just equipped with regular torpedoes, ships that have them, but there are a couple of varieties of specialist torpedoes which do fun things, and these range from torpedoes that go faster, torpedoes that hit harder, to torpedoes that follow you around, and torpedoes that are Dark Age relics, such as vortex torpedoes, which when they hit, they automatically do a critical damage.
Which is real rude.
I've
actually got the list in front. So like Steven said, short burn torpedoes, those just like normal torpedoes, except they go 40 centimeters each ordnance phase instead of 30. And then The downside of that is you roll a d6 every time you move them, and on a roll of 6, the torpedoes run out of fuel and just go away.
Boop.
Which you might not think is a huge trade-off, but one of the other problems with Ordnance in general is that if they run into a blast marker, chance that they're detonated by whatever's going on, and it all just goes away. And there's nothing as sad as being like, oh god, I've got this 12 torpedo salvo, I'm going to shove it right down that ship's throat, I'm going to murder them. It only has to go through one blast marker. What are the
Oh.
No more torpedoes.
Yep. One
yeah.
out of 6 times, it will happen every time.
Every time. Yeah, at least once a game it seems like that happens to me, and I feel like I just don't fire enough torpedoes for that to be statistics.
And that goes for all attack craft too. If you fly a big old wave of bombers and their fighter escort straight into an asteroid field or a blast marker, they might just accidentally die in atomic fire.
Yep, we've seen Empire Strikes Back. We know how those TIE fighters do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the short burns. Then there are guided torpedoes. These are probably those things that the Mechanicum keep in large numbers for themselves, sneaky bastards. They're just like normal torpedoes, except at the beginning of the Ordnance phase, they can make a 45-degree turn. If the ship that launches them passes the leadership test. And if the test has failed, an enemy ship can try and pass a leadership check to turn them 45 degrees the way the enemy wants. Which is fun.
Yep.
I don't see these a whole lot. In BFG, there was a Tau version that you couldn't hack, and it was upsetting and real rude.
Like most Tau things, really.
Yeah. Fucking Tau. But these are fun, right? They just get a little turn. You can send them off. When you've got that first volley, and the enemy can normally just sort of sidestep and be fine. No longer. Huzzah. Then there are seeking torpedoes. And these are fun. Because they don't get screwed up by enemy counter-hacking like guided torpedoes, and they don't attack friendly ships. They turn 45 degrees at the start of the Ordnance phase towards the nearest enemy ship. Which is almost universally a good thing. Like, I can see a couple of times, oh no, it turned after the Cobra instead of the crippled battleship I wanted to hit. But for the most part, pretty fun. The downside here is that when they move through blast markers, they blow up on a 5 or 6 instead of just a 6. But honestly, I think it's a good trade-off to never accidentally hit your own ship.
Yeah.
Seems fun.
Again, it's all worth it for the never accidentally hitting their own ship.
Yep.
Which is pretty great.
Next on our list are barrage bombs, which I've never actually seen played with because they're very specialist. So these are torpedoes designed to go into an atmosphere and blow the shit out of planetary targets. So, if your ship is in low orbit in one of the boarding missions, you can fire them at the planet, and each one that hits the planet scores an assault point if the wave is strength 6 or less. More assault points, the bigger the wave. The problem is barrage bombs, which attack ships, don't ignore shields. Which
kind of defeats the purpose of using torpedoes.
It really does. It really does. Like, these are one of those things where it's so specialized. It's like, for the most part, unless you're Mechanicum and cheat, you're getting a torpedo as part of a campaign refit, so it's semi-random. You've already got an experienced ship, and then you got to make sure that ship is in a planetary assault when you're the attacker, and then you got to get it. It's a whole lot. They're not great. We may even have straight up left them out of the Battlefleet Heresy rules now that I'm thinking on it.
No, they're in there.
They're in there? Yeah. Well,
yeah. I wasn't happy about it because it was a lot of stuff I had to type and reformat the page just to fit them in there for something that someone's never going to use.
If any of you use barrage bombs, let me know for our sanity.
I'll send you $1 in the mail.
Then there are melted torpedoes. So melted torpedoes are really
These are the scary ones.
They've got melt-a-bomb warheads. It sounds like they should murder the shit out of an enemy ship, and they do, but not
Not the way you would think.
So, their special rules is hits from a melta torpedo inflict no actual damage. Instead, they suffer or they cause a automatic fire critical. Now, as you can imagine, fire on a spaceship is not good. There's not a lot of oxygen, and it's real cramped. So, what happens is, in the end phase, one of the things you do is you try and put out a fire for every point of hull your ship fix a critical damage or put out a fire. If you don't put out a fire, it does a point of damage. So these aren't going to do a whole lot to a healthy, fine ship. But if you hit a crippled ship with a couple, and suddenly that ship is, kind of facing the wrong way already, and it's on fire, you don't have to worry about shooting it anymore. It will kill itself.
Yep.
The downside of these is that any ship that has melta torpedoes, which suffers a critical hit to the prow, which is where the torpedoes are stored, suffers an extra D3 fire criticals in addition to whatever pain it's already suffered as the torpedoes explode in the magazine. Don't get caught with these in your magazine. Shoot the damn things.
Yep. Vortex torpedoes will do the same thing.
Yep, only worse. So vortex torpedoes, as Steven said, these are the pride and joy of torpedoes in the Heresy.
Every torpedo wants to be a vortex torpedo when it grows up.
It's true.
And in fact, Lionel Johnson probably goes to bed cuddling one.
It's fact. We know it. Jesse will confirm.
It's true.
Yeah, so these are exactly like all other vortex weapons. They make a little hole of warp space in real space, except again, these are 100-yard long torpedoes, so it's a much bigger hole. So hits inflicted by vortex torpedoes automatically cause critical damage. So that's how you can get your shields permanently turned off, weapons destroyed, a bulkhead collapse that'll do D6 additional damage to the damage you've already taken. They're amazing. They're terrifying. Don't ever get hit with them. That's my pro tip for that. And then, much like the melta torpedoes, if a ship that has them gets a critical hit to the prow where the torpedoes are, it suffers an extra D3 points of damage and an automatic critical hit because suddenly there are 13 tiny warp gates in the prow. It's not good.
Nope. It is a bad time if you are anything. No matter what you are, it's a bad time. Except maybe a demon. Demons might be the only things that don't care.
That's true, except there are no demon ships, so you're going to have a bad time.
Yep, at least not in Heresy. There are demon ships in classic BFG, but that's a whole other thing.
Heresy.
Yep.
There haven't been that many problems yet.
Yep, not yet.
So that's all the torpedo shenanigans.
Now we get to the real fun stuff.
Well, not quite yet, because I want to talk about orbital mines for just a second. We do have some mine layer upgrades in Battlefleet Gothic, Battlefleet Heresy, and you can also, when you're a defender in certain scenarios, you're allowed to buy like the planet's defenses, some of which can be orbital mines. So if you've got them on a ship, they pop out like attack craft squadrons, but only one per launch bay, and they either hang around until somebody runs over them, in which case they explode, and it's bad. Or, as is more common, they will drift towards the nearest enemy ship at something like 15 centimeters a turn until dealt with. Which, again, it doesn't sound very far, but it's 15 centimeters, well, I say turn, per ordnance phase. So 30 centimeters a turn, which
They've
is
still
faster
outpaced
than
an
every
Imperial
cruiser.
Yep.
So they'll catch you, and, if the enemy's laid them, you're probably going towards them rather than away, so suddenly you've got problems.
Yep.
But they don't get used a whole lot.
Well, with good reason, too, because even when an orbital mine is shot down, it still does damage. Normally, an orbital mine that comes into contact with an enemy ship and explodes just rolls 8 dice against the target, which is one less than a battleship torpedo spread. So let that sink in for a second. And even if you shoot it down with your turrets, it automatically still rolls 4 dice against you, which is only 2 less than a standard cruiser spread.
Yeah.
So orbital mines are incredibly dangerous because even when you shoot them, they still hurt you.
Yeah, the only reason you don't see them a whole lot is because it's not often a ship is equipped as a mine layer. It does take something out of you because instead of launching, 2 fighters or bombers from that launch bay, it's 1 mine that the enemy's going to work very hard to not get hit by. But on the other, I want to say 5
melt
points
torpedoes
if you're
and
bringing
vortex
them
torpedoes.
as, like,
if they,
individual mines.
it is 5 points per
Sorry,
cost
what?
of launch bay. Or 5.
Oh no,
They cost
I meant if you
5
were taking
points
them.
per launch bay. Oh,
I meant if you were taking them as part of like a planetary defense
as planetary defense,
list.
those are.
I think they're like 5 points apiece.
They are 5 points apiece. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. They are dangerous to the carrier as well, though. Much like melted torpedoes and vortex torpedoes, if a ship that carries orbital mines suffers critical damage, which would damage one of their launch bays, then the mines detonate, and the ship in question takes an extra D3 points of damage. So be careful. But I think that's basically everything for dumb ordnance, which means we get to move on to the truly fun part of ordnance, attack craft. Like I said, attack craft comes in 3 varieties. There are bombers, fighters, and assault boats. Now, from a fluff perspective, what exactly a bomber, a fighter, or an assault boat is kind of varies. In the original Chaos publication, the original Chaos Fleet list, assault boats were Dreadclaws. And in the original Imperial Navy publication, assault boats were called Sharks, which presumably was half of a Kestis assault ram.
It's actually bigger than a Keistis because they can hold like 100 dudes in them. But yeah, they look kind of like half a Keistis, or like that new Space Wolf flyer thing that looks like half a Keistis. Scale that up. It's the same thing.
The different individual types of craft in the Heresy vary so widely that for the purpose of Battlefleet Heresy, we just call it fighter, bomber, assault boat. Fighters could be Ziphons. They could be Fury interceptors. We know for sure that at least
Thunderbolts.
Yeah, we know for sure that at least one first captain, not naming any names, rode a Fury, like a surfboard, straight into a Dark Angel ship.
I mean, that sounds vaguely familiar. I don't know.
Oh, it was Sevatar. Sevatar did it. Yeah, I think it's in Prince of Crows. He rides a Fury like a surfboard.
Which is funny.
Bombers.
All of these ships are wildly different in size and equipment, right? Like a Ziphon's a little speedy thing. We all have a rough idea of the size compared to various 40K things because we may have had the privilege of seeing one on the table. It's got a little missile bay and a couple of las cannons. Hooray! Then you have something like the Fury Interceptor, which is 100 feet long, has a crew of 5, top gunner, bottom gunner, a bank of las cannons, a shit
It's a
ton
Boeing
of
747 that's used to intercept planes.
It's a fighter.
Yeah.
I can only, at least in my own head, I'd like to think, and this goes for bombers as well, which are all over the place in 40K, or in Heresy, that instead of saying you will have a squadron of fighters is always 12 or 15 or 30 ships. They've just got stats somewhere, right? Like your fighter should be this fast, and a squadron should take up this much room on the hangar deck and be able to fire this amount of energy in weapons at the enemy. Because otherwise, it's all insanity.
Yep. But for the purpose of that, when it comes to modeling your Battlefleet Heresy and you're picking out what you want to use as your attack craft markers, go wild. Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
use whichever thing you want, because nothing matters and the rules are made up. But also everything matters and the rules are also made up.
That's true. This is
So
the fan
Attack
version
Craft,
of a dead game.
yeah, take it with a grain of salt or not. Whatever, live your life. I'm not your dad. Attack Craft generally all have the same purpose, but they go about doing it different ways, which is to say that they still are made to damage ships. The exception to this being fighters, so we may as well start with them. Fighters launch 30 centimeters, and their job is to shoot other attack craft or to defend the attack craft that they are in. So if you were to launch take a Styx cruiser, which has 3 launch bays on each side, so it can launch 6 waves, 6 tokens, if you will, of attack craft. So you launch 3 bombers, you launch 3 fighters. Now they fly around, and any instance where they would get in trouble, those 3 fighters are doing the heavy lifting before the bombers are. And in fact, the bombers will simply die if they find other fighters. This, of course, depends on what particular rules for Ordnance you're using. There's a lot of homebrew out there for attack craft.
And a lot of good ones, I must say. The original
a lot of good
Battlefleet
ones.
Gothic is just sort of this token removes this token, and that's the end of it.
Yep, picking up like candy.
There's a great, what's that Warproof magazine? Is it 36? The Warproof magazine with it?
Yeah, I think so. 36 or 37.
All right. That has some amazing rules where, if you're a carrier guy, it's great because every fighter has its own little turret, and you're rolling dice to see if this squadron kills that squadron, and if they don't, the other squadron kind of keeps doing its thing instead of disappearing. And it's great. It's lovely. Look around. I think if we haven't posted links to them, we will. I know we reference it in projects that are coming up. Bunch of fun stuff going on. You can also use fighters.
Whoops. Come back. Okay, there we go.
You can also use fighters to go after torpedo waves.
To shoot them down.
That's one of their primary missions. In normal kind of core rules BFG, 1 token of fighters, so 1 squadron of fighters, deletes a torpedo salvo. Could be 1 torpedo, could be 30. They're all gone. That's real good, because again, you're not getting hit with those torpedoes through your shields. They can also just sit on the base of a ship.
Yep.
And they move
Fly
whenever
around.
the ship does. Yep. It's called
Combat
Air Patrol, which should really be Combat Space Patrol, but CAP sounds a lot cooler than CISP, so it's still CAP. The upside to that is naturally because fighters move in the Ordnance phase. If you tried to constantly screen, there's going to be always a way to get through, to touch the ship's base that you want to touch as the attacker. If you're doing CAP, you just put the fighter on the base. That's kind of 360 security. And they'll hit anything that attacks the ship first. The downside of that is, if the ship gets blast markers from being shot at by macro cannons or lances or whatever, you roll a d6, and on a 1, the fighter squadron got in the way of something they really shouldn't have, and they're all dead.
Yeah, and it bears noting, because we personally use so many different versions of homebrew for attack craft, for the purpose of this episode, we're not going to get too deep in depth on how fighters and bombers interact with each other and with ships, because there's, again, 6 or 7 different really good ways to play it. But we are going to give you kind of an overview.
They do all interact with ships the same way.
Which is to say that fighters do nothing.
Yes, fighters always do. Well, not quite nothing, but not great. They'll never hurt a ship.
Yes.
But yeah, the ways that all of these ordnance interact with each other, there's, I think, probably 4 good ways I like playing. Like I said, I've come down on Warp Rift magazine. The one issue they have that's fantastic. Where's it going? I'm not going to be able to find it now that I'm here.
But yeah, fighters, their objective when their wave that they're escorting actually gets to a ship is to suppress turrets. which keep them from shooting down their friends, the bombers or the assault boats. Speaking of bombers, bombers are slower than fighters, whereas fighters and assault boats will go 30 centimeters. Bombers only go 20. And it bears noting that when you mix and match your attack craft, you are moving at the speed of your slowest member. So even if you have 3 bombers, 3 fighters, you're only going 20 centimeters until those fighters break off.
It's Warproof 33.
33. Bombers are the ones that do the real hull point damage to ships. The most common way that we play is a bomber that comes into contact with a ship, rolls a d6, and then there are modifiers to that.
It's just the way to play, Stephen.
That's true.
They interact with ships the same. So you'll have your bombers, you'll have your wave, right? Of say kind of our traditional 2 fighters, 2 bombers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll go in, and the turrets will fire because your dice are bad sometimes. Bomber squadron, and then you subtract the result from the number of turrets, and that's the number of shots you get. Each fighter suppresses a turret. So 2 fighters against a cruiser that has 2 turrets, instead of each bomber being d6 minus 2, which could yield you no shots, right? Like if you roll a 1 on that d6 and it's minus 2, you get nothing. It's just straight d6. And then you roll, and it goes through shields, and as a bonus, always hits a ship on the weakest armor facing.
Yep, which doesn't often come into play in a Heresy, given that it's a lot of Chaos and Imperial ships fighting each other. But if you were fighting against Orcs...
Well, Orcs is great, but even Imperials, like Imperial ships always have that 6 up prow, and then 5 up sides.
Yes.
And if you've got, a couple of lunars, and you fire a torpedo wave in their face, they might look at it and go, "You need 6s to do damage, boss. I don't really care." Bomber wave comes at you, it's needing 5s, and there's going to be a lot. But again, just like with torpedoes, you have to decide whether you want to brace or not before the dice get rolled to see what damage is actually coming your way. So you could brace, and those 3 bombers that are each rolling d6 minus 1 attacks against you roll triple 1s, and it turns out no damage was going to be done to you either way, but you still braced, and that sucks.
Yep.
On the other hand, sometimes that 1 bomber gets through, does 5 points of damage, and fuck my life.
Yep, that's just the end of it. The other We Hurt Ships attack craft is the assault boat, or I like to think of them as Dreadclaws because I use tiny little metal Dreadclaw models, so that's just what perpetually they are in my mind. But they hurt ships in a different way. They perform hit and run attacks, which is a boarding party getting in, doing damage, and then hopefully getting out. Although that last part is always a bit more dicey. But
and
assault
not important
boats,
in Battlefleet Gothic.
Yeah, and also not important. So the car
10 guys more or less is not important for BFG as long as they detonated a magazine before they died.
Yeah, the vehicle that got them there is worth more than they are.
It's true, even if they're Space Marines.
Even if they're Space Marines, because they came in a Thunderhawk. And we'll talk about Thunderhawks a little bit. But assault craft, every one that comes in contact with an enemy ship inflicts a critical hit. Now, on its own, this might not be that big of a deal. If you catch a broadside, and of all of the 6 hits that get absorbed, one of them does a critical, your engines might be damaged. You might lose your port armament. But if 3 Dreadclaws jump on you and you suffer 3 critical hits, you might be suddenly going from full health to a wailing little baby that doesn't have port, starboard, or dorsal weapons.
Yeah, and
until
remember,
you
you're
fix
fixing
them.
those on a 6, and you're rolling as many dice as you have hull points left. There's been times fighting Steven when I've had a ship with 5 hull points with 5 different criticals. Like, do I want to be able to shoot again, or do I want to put the fire out? Like, it's bad. And it's not rolling like you normally would roll on the critical hits table. Normally, critical hits are 2d6, the higher numbers being the worst things. With hit and run attacks like assault boats, you're just rolling 1d6, and because this is the Horus Heresy, and you're generally going to be a Legion fleet, you're going to get a +1 to that because Space Marines are crazy.
Yep.
Which is great, because they'll never fail to do something.
Yep. Unless they are against another Space Marine ship, which inflict a -1 to hit and run attacks.
Because sometimes your battleship is full of dreadnoughts.
Yep.
Even
It'd
if all
be
your
like that
Terminators have
sometimes.
teleported to the surface.
Yep. Yes. Now, there was something else I was going to say about that. And now, unlike damage inflicted by bombers, you cannot brace against assault boats.
Yeah,
If
it
they
just
get
sort of
through,
happens.
you're gonna hurt.
And it's also an amazing way to deal with escorts, because escorts only have one hull point.
Yep.
And
automatically
specifically,
die.
any critical hit will destroy them.
Yep.
And there's
So
nothing they
if
can
you-
do. You know, they fire their one turret, and you've got that one, Shark or Thunderhawk. Especially if it's a Space Marine crew against a non-Space Marine crew escort.
Yep, it's just
I rolled
gone.
D6 +1, and I need a 2 to kill it. Bye.
Rip. Which
Nice.
does. Thunderhawks are Space Marine exclusive ordnance, which means that only a ship within a Starday's crew, so either a Chaos or an Imperial Navy vessel that is paid 15 points for them, or a battle barge or strike cruiser, which automatically come with them, with carrier capacity, can launch Thunderhawks. Thunderhawks are a little bit slower. They're 20 centimeters, but they and their cousin, the Thunderhawk Annihilator, have the special benefit of being able to perform 2 jobs at once. A regular Thunderhawk can be both a fighter or an assault boat, and a Thunderhawk Annihilator can be either a fighter and a bomber. So they can perform both of those roles simultaneously.
Yeah, which is awesome, because you don't have to, declare when you launch them what they're going to do. They can do both whenever they want, at any moment in time they want.
Yep.
And they're a little harder to kill. So in kind of the basic rules, where a lot of it is, my token removes this token, or I've been hit by a turret, I'm dead, Thunderhawks get a 4-up save against whatever has happened to them. Which is amazing.
Yep.
It's really
it'll keep them in the fight. Thunderhawk as a combat air patrol vessel does pretty good work.
Yeah, because normally you'll fire, I'm going to fire a couple of small waves of torpedoes. Maybe my Cobras fire individually, and the cap has to jump on those torpedoes, and then the cap goes away, and then the next thing comes. But with Thunderhawk, they have a chance of hanging out.
Yep, they're just always there.
Real disconcerting.
Yep.
And we say Thunderhawk, but really, if some of you, and I know some of you are thinking this, they're going, well, man, what about all the other Space Marine? Like, what happened about a Fire Raptor or whatever? Storm Eagles. Why are there no Storm Eagles in Battlefleet Gothic? Battlefleet Heresy.
Well, there kind of are, in the sense that you can just use the rules for a Thunderhawk for them.
Yes, like if you happen to find a Battlefleet Heresy sized Storm Eagle, 1, send me the link.
Yeah,
2,
for sure.
You just got to think about it in your head. All right, Storm Eagle carries what? 3 times as many guys as the Thunderhawk? Twice as many? I forget the actual ratio now that I'm here talking about it.
A Storm Eagle carries 20. A Thunderhawk carries like 40. Are you thinking of a Storm Bird? The
Storm
big, huge
Bird,
one?
My bad.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of numbers, right? That little 20 by 20 or 40 by 5, depending on how you base your attack craft, doesn't really matter. It all adds up to the same thing in the end. That's still a couple of hundred, like 1,000 miles of space cube. There could be 12 Thunderhawks in there. There could be 10 Storm Eagles. But they're all fulfilling about the same role. And at the scale of interstellar spaceship fights, it's all about the same. So we call them Thunderhawks just because that's what BFG originally used, so it's a little easier for people coming from like 40k BFG to wrap their heads around Battlefleet Heresy. But for you Battlefleet Heresy purists, feel free. Base them however you want. Put whatever tiny models you find on them. Send us pictures. We love pictures.
Oh yeah, we'll put them up. We'll put them on Instagram. We'll put them on Facebook. Fuck, I'm surprised we're not putting them on Facebook right now.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it. But I think that's about everything for Ordnance today.
No, it's not.
Oh, what else do we have?
One glorious stepchild of the Ordnance family.
Is it Ursus Claws?
It's not. Sadly, it's not. No, sir. This is the distinguished and elite Torpedo Bomber Squadron.
Ah, yes.
Which...
It's the best of all possible worlds.
Yay.
Yay. You mean a worse bomber? Joy.
Yeah, so this is a really weird thing. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bomber that instead of carrying the normal, B1 spread of bomber missiles, carries a couple of those 100-foot-long torpedoes.
Oh,
it's an
if
upgrade.
You are following along if you are looking in one of your floppy books, this is on page 158 of Armada.
Yeah, I'm in the Warp Storm myself. It's on page 4. It's exciting.
Ooh.
Yeah. Somebody bound it for me. I'm sorry, page 6. Anyway, it's an upgrade.
Quote unquote.
And it's like 10 points per strength point of a vessel. So while a Styx can be upgraded to have Thunderhawks and whatnot for a fairly reasonable price of, 15? To get Space Marine crew and the ability to launch fancy stuff.
Yeah.
For 60 points, it can instead be equipped with torpedo bombers. So torpedo bombers fire just like regular, or deployed just like regular bombers. They go 20 centimeters. They count as bombers when fighters are trying to shoot them down and all that sort of stuff. But at the beginning of any ordnance phase, they can be replaced. A squadron of torpedo bombers can be replaced with a Strike 2 torpedo salvo. Hooray!
Joy.
And the torpedoes function according to the standard torpedo rules, but have a limited fuel supply, so are removed at the end of the same ordnance phase they are launched in.
Yep, that's a good way for a ship that doesn't have torpedoes, specifically one of the Chaos carriers like the Styx, like the book mentions, or a Devastation, to suddenly be packing torpedoes. Because, say, take a Styx. If a Styx launched 6 torpedo bombers, and each of those torpedo bombers evolves into 2 torpedoes, that's 12 torpedoes coming at you.
And it would launch, all as one big wave, which is fun. Mm-hmm. It's also handy, like you said, just to make the enemy do something about it, right? So say you launch a mixed group, right? Say 2 fighters, 2 bombers, 2 torpedo bombers, and when you get real close, the torpedo bombers launch torpedoes, and suddenly instead of your turrets having one target they can fire at, they have to start picking and choosing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not bad. Is it 60 points good? Dear listener, I think it's not. However, and I realize, Stephen, we're going to have to go talking about all the different attack craft rules at some point in the future.
Yes, we will.
But I will mention...
And I'm putting it off as long as possible.
I know. But one of the ways, my preferred way of playing with attack craft limits the number that you get. So normally you have an infinite supply of fighters and bombers, more or less, as long as you can keep reloading ordnance. This always struck me as kind of dumb, because, well, you only have so many in the hangars, and once they get blown up, they're blown up.
Mm-hmm.
So this could actually be a handy way of preserving your ordnance, right? Because the torpedo bombers aren't the ones that are risking the turret fire and getting blasted. They fire their torpedoes. They go home. You can relaunch them next turn, and it's fine. It's safe and happy. Of course, the one other downside is they can only launch their torpedoes at the start of an ordnance phase. So you launch your torpedo bombers, and then they have to fly around as torpedo bombers for a turn, and then they fire torpedoes. And that doesn't seem like it's just one more step where something terrible can happen.
Yeah.
Well, are we good now?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I talked about them because we had to, but don't.
While you were doing that, I accidentally disconnected Steven, so there was a little bit of drama here. We're good.
Oh, well, thank God I kept rambling.
Okay. Well, yeah.
What else?
Did you finish talking about them?
I did, although there's one thing we failed to mention when it came to wings. So we've talked about fighters and bombers as squadrons, and they can get launched together as it's called a wing, or a wave of attack craft, right? So you launch your wave, and they act as essentially one unit, right? If one squadron of the wave goes over a blast marker, the whole wave has to roll and can be blown up, etc. You can break apart waves at any point in time.
Yep,
and the individual squadrons can go do their own thing. But the reverse is not true. You can't launch like an individual fighter wave and an individual bomber and think they'll be able to meet up and go do work together. And the reason for that is, again, these 20-centimeter squares are several hundred miles of space, and it's just really hard for things that tiny to meet up with each other and get back in formation and do all of that stuff. So they just said, no, it can't be done. And like torpedoes, if you happen to be a madman and run 2 carriers in a squadron, and they're base to base, you can launch kind of one uber wave of attack craft, which can be real fun and just kind of terrifying because you're like, well, I got 8 bombers that are going to attack you now, and the enemy cries and you laugh.
What do you mean you've got 8 bombers?
So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it.
Alrighty.
Did we miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think we've pretty much got it all.
Jesse,
do you have
any questions?
Basically, I was drinking from a garden hose there. Or a fire hose, excuse me. I think that's how the saying is.
It could be a garden hose. We don't know.
But no, I thought I learned quite a bit. And hope the listeners at home really enjoyed this, because I know I did. I was just sitting back listening to it.
Next episode, let's talk about Dark Angels. Dark Angels, and maybe we'll talk about...
You don't need to pander to Jesse.
No, it's Road to Thramis. Always keep the sound man happy, Austin.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, let's talk about Dark Angels, and let's talk about let's go into more detail about some of the heavier classes of ships, the Hades, the battle cruisers, the Hades.
You just want to talk about Hades, don't you?
It's the best heavy cruiser in the game, and I defy anyone to prove me wrong.
Well, there you go. We're going to start talking. Maybe we'll do a mix and match. We'll start doing it like that. We'll talk about 1 or 2 legions, talk about a class of ship.
Yep.
Who knows?
Maybe start thinking about creating a type of ship for the Dark Sovereign proxy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, using those experimental rules, we could make the Dark Sovereign class. Yeah, we could do it.
Exciting.
Yeah, so tune in next week. Same warp coordinates and such.
Yeah,
if you like...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Nope,
I'm sorry.
you go ahead.
I'm sorry. If you want to, again, if you want to follow up and check out these rules, be sure to go to rr30k.com and click on the Battlefleet Heresy tab. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at rr30k podcast, on Instagram at Remembrancer's Retreat. You can also follow us on our Discord, which the link will be below in the description of this show. And definitely want to thank our patrons. If you're interested in becoming a patron, go over to patreon.com/RR30K podcast, starting with our patrons for April, our Legion Praetors, Alex Self, Chris Mack, Jacob Dillon, Garner.Tree of Woe, Jason Tick, Joe from Music City Heresy, Matthew Boyce, and Mr. Baldwick. In our Centurion class, we have Andrew N., Angry Boy, Black Label Painting, John Christensen, M. Hernandez, Mark Henry, Minis by Applesauce, and Scott LeMay. And in our Legion Sergeant tier, we have Aaron Maynard, Duncan, Emily O'Hare, Garrett Lowe, and Travis Smith. Thank you all so much for becoming patrons, and I'll be sure to send you guys a sticker out here very soon once I get my printer up and running and fully moved in. So thanks again. Yeah, you can also send us email at remembrancersretreat@gmail.com. And also tonight's music is Bomber, written by Duane Elms on the album Carmen Miranda's Ghost from 1989.
Yep. So that's everything we've got. We'll see you next week. And as the saying goes, good hunting.
Without a slip, the shuttle drops them free. They set the track for their attack. The backup comms agree. Now trim the jet and don't forget to plot in the return. It's time to go for down below the planet that must burn. He just flies the bomber. He never sees their eyes when the hell comes down. He just flies the bomber.